This is a story of the Cherokee removal. The Cherokee Nation was one of great wealth and prosperity. They had a thriving judicial system that was praised by Thomas Jefferson himself. They were also recognized as one of the 5 civilized tribes. However, the white settlers resented the Cherokee and wanted them removed. This is a story of triumph and tragedy. Because of the Indian Removal Act, the Indians lost precious land and culture. The Jackson administration triumphed from the Indian Removal Act by stealing the land and resources that rightfully belonged to the Cherokee. In 1785, the United States signed a treaty with the Cherokee Nation that established peaceful relations. This treaty was eventually broken. There was always tension between the white settlers and the Cherokee Nation. The settlers resented the Cherokee Nation mainly because they wanted the land that the Cherokee Nation occupied. The Cherokee feared the white settlers because they worried they would kick them off their lands. These fears began to grow when in 1828 the pro-removal Andrew Jackson became president. George Washington's way of handling the tensions was to make the Cherokee Indians as much like white people as possible. Because of this, the Cherokee Indians began to participate in American society. Many became landowners and business owners. A few even owned slaves. For their efforts, the Cherokee became recognized as one of the 5 civilized tribes. Despite this, the Cherokee Indians were still despised amongst white settlers. These tensions escalated when the settlers learned that there was gold in the Cherokee lands. In 1830, the state of Georgia expanded its power in order to nullify the Cherokee law. The Cherokee Nation opposed this and took the state of Georgia to the Supreme Court in 1831. The state of Georgia believed so strong in state rights that it refused to send representatives to the Supreme Court. They demanded that the case be conducted in the courts of Georgia. However, the state of Georgia's requests were denied and they eventually agreed to send a representative to the Supreme Court. The Cherokee Nation and the state of Georgia faced each other in 2 famous court cases, Georgia versus the Cherokee Nation 1831 and Worcester versus Georgia 1832. The Supreme Court declined the first case due to the fact that the Cherokee Nation was not part of the United States. This left the Cherokee Nation in the hands of the land-greedy people of Georgia. In 1830, the state of Georgia passed a law making it illegal to enter the Cherokee Nation without a license. Many people refused to obey this law. Among them was missionary Sam Worcester. Worcester was found guilty of trespassing by the Georgia courts. After the verdict, he took his case to the Supreme Court and stated that the law passed by Georgia was unconstitutional. This case would be known as Worcester v. Georgia 1832. The court ruled in favor of Worcester, stating that the Cherokee Nation was a foreign entity and that the laws the state of Georgia passed did not apply inside the Cherokee Nation. Despite the court's orders, United States President Andrew Jackson refused to send troops to Georgia to protect Cherokee land. Instead, he ordered the U.S. government to construct the Treaty of Dakota, which would justify the eventual removal. The leaders of the Cherokee Nation announced that anyone who signed an agreement to give up Cherokee land would be executed. Despite this, the U.S. government was able to persuade a group of 100 Cherokee Indians, led by Chief Major Ridge, to sign the treaty. These representatives were not elected by the Cherokee Nation. They were aware that they would be executed upon their return to Georgia by the Cherokee Nation for signing the treaty. Because of this, they signed death warrants. The Treaty of Dakota stated that in exchange for compensation, the Cherokee would give up their ancestral homelands to the U.S. government. These lands would then be settled by the white settlers. The Cherokee Indians would be relocated west of the Mississippi River to Oklahoma. However, not everyone in Washington supported the Indian Removal Act. For example, Davy Crockett opposed it for he claimed that it was immoral and that it violated the agreement the government had made with the Native Americans. The treaty was signed in 1838. The Cherokee Nation called upon Congress to cancel the treaty, stating that its signing was illegal. However, their requests were denied. In 1838, under orders from United States President Andrew Jackson, troops were sent to Georgia to enforce the Treaty of Dakota. Only 2,000 Cherokee Indians left voluntarily. The Cherokee that refused to leave either were forced into military detention camps or were forced out with arms. Some of the Cherokee took up arms and attempted to fight off the army. This tactic, however, did not work. The U.S. Army defeated them and many of the Cherokee who fought were killed. 11,500 Cherokee Indians were forced to walk the Trail of Tears. Of them, 4,000 died. Malaria was very common due to the amount of mosquitoes. Germs were spread due to poor sanitation. The Cherokee did not have a stable water supply. They drank from the fresh water sources they could find, which consisted of rivers, lakes, and streams. Often there were no fresh water sources available, which led to death from extreme dehydration. Food was also a large problem as they had no stable food supply. The men would hunt when they could. During the winter, it was too cold to hunt, and the Cherokee had to survive on small daily rations. A large amount of them died of starvation. Due to these food shortages, many of the Indians were not able to meet their dietary needs and grew weak. Likewise, the clothing was inadequate for the cold, which caused many to experience hypothermia. Some of the elders gave their blankets to the sick children at the expense of their own health. The wagons they brought with them were the only source of shelter. Those who were not able to sleep in the wagon had to sleep on the floor. Another hardship was that often the Cherokee Indians would either get lost or were separated from their families. In his diary, Jesse Brown, a Cherokee boy, wrote, "My mother and sisters had vanished in the crowd. I tried to find them, but I could not. Some of the Cherokee faces around me seemed familiar, but I could not be certain who they were. It was not just the darkness and confusion. Most of the faces were distorted with fear and grief. All around us was the sound of weeping and moaning. The thud of hooves and angry oaths bellowed at us." Another hardship was that the Cherokee were abused and harassed repeatedly by the soldiers. Soldiers were sent with the Cherokee to make sure they were traveling towards Oklahoma and that they stayed in line. They implemented very harsh rules that the Indians had to follow. For example, they were not allowed to bury their loved ones. The soldiers that wanted to grow cotton were particularly abusive. They derailed the Indian spirits in order to make sure that they would receive the land previously occupied by the Cherokee Nation. In his personal account, John Burnett, a translator for the Cherokee, summed up the conditions in his quote, "On the morning of November the 17th, we encountered a terrific sleet and snowstorm with freezing temperatures, and from that day until we reached the end of the fateful journey on March the 26th, 1839, the sufferings of the Cherokee were awful." This states that the Cherokee Indians faced extreme cold temperatures and went through intense suffering. Some of the Cherokee Indians began to face toxic mental states, and a few even committed suicide. In 1839, Chief John Ridge and his family were executed by the Cherokee Nation for signing the treaty. The Trail of Tears left an everlasting legacy. Because of it, the Cherokee Nation crumbled and fell apart. Cherokee Indians lost their identity. Much of the culture, land, and traditions that were precious to the Cherokee were lost. After this event, many of the Cherokee Indians experienced intense trauma and flashbacks from the Trail of Tears. A large number of them suffered psychological damage. After the Indian Removal Act was completed, Andrew Jackson stated, "Hopefully these aliens can adapt to American society and become civilians." What he means when he says this is that he hopes that American Indians lose their culture and identity and envelop themselves in American society to become regular Americans. Some of the Cherokee Indians were able to adapt to American society. They became farmers and started businesses. During the 1900s, the United States continued its suppression of Cherokee culture by sending children of the Cherokee Nation to boarding schools with the intention of erasing their cultural identity. They were whipped when they spoke their native language. They were also taught English and learned American customs. The Trail of Tears got its name because when the Indians cried, their tears dried up on the sand and formed into crystals. Many people have found ways to honor the Cherokee Indians' tragedy at the Trail of Tears. The Cherokee Cultural Center has a Trails of Tears exhibit. The Museum of Native American History hosts an annual art show honoring the Trail of Tears. In Oklahoma, they have an annual bike ride where riders ride the trail that was walked by the American Indians. Oklahoma has also begun to create graves to remember those that died on the Trail of Tears. What we can learn from this horrible event is that if you dehumanize a group, you can put them through intense tragedies that will last a lifetime. The world has seen this theme repeat throughout its history. For example, the reason World War II happened was because Adolf Hitler dehumanized the Jews and viewed them as nothing but inferior people who were in his way. Although there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, the American people have found ways and have made progress towards healing the wounds that have been left by the Jackson administration.